I can't meditate because I can't turn my brain off. And it's not like a light switch, it's like a dimmer switch, right? You're going to just turn it down slowly over time, and you're going to allow the mind to get quieter and quieter and quieter. But if thoughts keep popping into your mind, they're always spinning, that is such valuable information as to what's going on like beneath the surface and what's happening kind of internally, and maybe what's happening with that true self.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savana podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of Savasana-skipper.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savana family. Welcome back to the show. I have yoga teacher Kelly Smith on with me today. She is an E-RYT 500. She's the founder of Yoga for You and the host of the iTunes podcast Mindful in Minutes. Kelly believes there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to yoga and meditation, and we are going to deep dive with her today on meditation. We're going to answer common questions like what to do if your mind is racing during Savasana or meditation, the pros and the cons of guided meditations, and why guided meditations can be kind of seen as a crutch, and why non-guided meditations are valuable too. So if you're a beginner meditator or someone who's sort of aspiring to meditate in the new year, there are great tips in here. And if you're a teacher or aspiring to teach, we end this episode with Kelly's short list of tips on how to create fantastic guided meditations for either your students or your family. So whether you want to create meditations or start meditating, this episode will inspire you. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you of the ways you can support the show. The first is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. I talk about that one a lot. And the other is by making a purchase on Savasana-skipper.com. And this week, I wanted to feature their Himalayan yak wool wrap. This is this gorgeous wool. It's like a gigantic scarf that you wrap around your whole body. It's just so cozy and gorgeous. So check that out, as well as all their clothing, jewelry, healing energy crystals. You can find all of that at Savasana-skipper.com, and you can use that coupon code TAKE25 for $25 off anything in your shopping cart if you're a new Savana Spirit customer. All right, let's dive into our conversation with Kelly. Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Well, I love connecting with fellow yoga teachers. And today we're going to talk about meditation, how to incorporate meditation into your yoga classes. So those of you that are teachers, this is going to be great. But even those of you that just have personal practice, like at home, I think it's always nice to interweave the meditation. And you're also going to give us some tips on how to write really great guided meditations, which I'm psyched about because I love guided meditations. So before we dive in, like, how did you get so passionate about meditation, or like bringing meditation back into the yoga classroom?
Yeah. So, like most yogis, my story is not very linear. There's lots of kind of different twists and turns, but I really started, I actually started my whole yoga journey when I was quite young, before I could even drive. So my mom would have to like drive me to my first yoga class and drop me off and pick me up. But I actually started my yoga practice because I was an athlete. I was an athlete all the way through college. And it was just a form of like cross training for my sports. And I was really into like the physical and the asana. And I am like very embarrassed to share this, but I used to be what I call a Savasana-skipper, which is that person that, you know, they're like, oh, well, I've done all my movement. I've burned all my calories. So now that we're just laying here in Shavasana, I'm going to like roll up my mat and sneak out and get those.
I love it. I love that you admit openly to that. It's really awesome because we all, no, it's so great to hear because you're like, I'm a Savasana-skipper. I love it. I had Judith Hansen-Lassiter on the show, and listeners, if you haven't listened to her episode about Shavasana, listen to it after this episode. And you know, I think it's so cool that you discovered yoga so young because I think that's unusual. I'm hearing it a little bit more, but that is such a game changer to have just even yoga in your life, even if you weren't doing the meditation part yet. And skipping Shavasana and such, but even just to have that in your life at age like 15, 16, I mean, that must have been amazing. I always just think like my entire high school and college years would have been transformed if I had discovered yoga a little earlier.
Well, it was really interesting. And so when I was in high school, I kind of started like when I was like 14, 15. And then when I was in high school, when I was 16, my mom was actually diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And she and I ended up being her primary caregiver. And it was during that time that I actually started to do a little bit of research into the therapeutic benefits of yoga. So I was still very much like, I was a Savasana-skipper, but I was like, oh, but maybe like, there's this whole other world out here where like people can actually do yoga without like moving a lot and doing all these like chaturangas, and like people can meditate and like they just sit still, and like, what is this wild thing? And because I was taking care of my mom, I wanted to just find something that we could do together. And she was kind of always into yoga. She was sort of my like introduction to it. She had this like big book of like yoga poses, and I'd always look at it and be like, oh, look at that bendy person. And isn't that incredible? And then I'd go to my class when I was little and try to like mimic it. But I started to explore like the therapeutic benefits of yoga. And it was not only so profound to really like learn about that whole other world out there, but then to also be able to do something like that with my mom. So I would do like really gentle movement with her, or we'd go to like a restorative class together, or do like a guided meditation. And it was just like this really kind of beautiful experience that came from something that felt very tragic in the moment, that we got to do together.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but I always kind of in the back of my mind, I knew this thing existed, but then I still stuck to my like power yoga, better if it was heated, and best if like Shavasana was like 60 seconds. If it was any longer, I was out of there. And then it wasn't until I graduated college, and I always just felt like maybe like the traditional path wasn't quite my path. I never felt like I fit in school. I was always kind of like a seeker and looking for something else. And I had really fallen in love with this one yoga studio that was in the small town I went to college in. And it just so happened they were doing a 200-hour that started the week after I graduated college. So I remember telling my mom, we were driving in the car, I was like, Mom, I know like I'm going to have this college degree, and, I just did all this work, did all this stuff, but I kind of just want to be a yoga teacher. And she was like, if that's what you think your heart is telling you to do, go do it. So I went and I did my 200-hour. But I was always afraid to actually like teach. And I thought, okay, I'll come and I'm going to learn how to teach like, that physical practice that I've been practicing, like be like a power instructor. And then again, like this idea of like restorative and meditation and mindfulness and pranayama started to come up. And I was always really interested by it. And it wasn't until several years later, I was currently living in Minneapolis, and my husband, well, my then boyfriend, now husband, got into medical school in a place that I lovingly refer to as a one Walmart, one bar town. And I moved there, and I had to leave like my career, and I had to leave everything. And I decided when I moved there that I was done being afraid, and I was going to start doing what I felt like I was supposed to do. And that was teach yoga and meditation. And so I was there for 3 years, and I was working with people, and this is pretty unusual in this day and age. It was a pretty untapped market. So it was a lot of people that didn't have much yoga experience. And so they weren't doing a really physical, powerful practice. They were just working on general mobility, or how do I breathe? How do I alleviate stress? And so I ended up opening a brick and mortar studio, and I really started to focus on kind of some of the more functional movement and some of the kind of deeper elements. I think about it as some of the other limbs, not just asanas, but, your yamas, your niyamas, your pranayama, and diving into that. And so that's where I really like fell in love with it. And then it wasn't until, again, I moved again from my husband's job to a different state, and I sold my studio, that I decided to transition everything to online. And I had always really loved meditation, and I had shared it with a lot of my one-on-one clients, but I'd never shared it like on such a large scale. And so after we moved, and I was really kind of going through this restructuring and transitioning my whole business to being location independent, I decided to start a meditation podcast where I could start sharing those meditations that I'd been using with my clients and my classes and my students for all of these years. And then I could kind of just share them with the world. And
so I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. I want to back up. When was the first time that meditated or tried to meditate and had an experience that was like, oh, this is interesting? Because I think a lot of people start and their mind is just racing. It's a very uncomfortable experience. Can you kind of pinpoint a moment or a day where you suddenly shifted from being like a meditation skeptic or struggling and suddenly feeling like, whoa, there is something here.
Yes. And I definitely was a meditation skeptic, like a big meditation skeptic. I was a Savasana-skipper, so I wasn't going to be buying into this whole meditation thing. But I remember right about the time that my husband was moving to a completely different state and I wasn't quite sure if I was going to go or not. I went through a really tough time in life. I think, I was in my early 20s and I was having I was stuck in that wheel of comparison and I had major imposter syndrome and I felt like my heart was pulling me to do one thing, but then society told me to do another. And there was just a lot on my plate. And I remembered way back to one of the teachers of my yoga teacher training who taught us meditation. And it was one of those things where it's like, it was always kind of in the back of my mind, but I never really paid it that much attention. But she had talked about how meditation, like when you just feel so overwhelmed and everything is just spinning, that it just helps you to stop and be still. And it can bring you so much clarity. And so it's kind of just at one of those points in life where I was just like, what am I going to do? Everything's out of my control. I just felt I was just overwhelmed and just anxious and things just weren't going very well. And so I decided to give it a try. And I did a guided meditation. And I just remember when I was done, I felt so much lighter and I felt like I finally had some clarity and that I wasn't clouded by that busyness of the brain and that constant, I describe it like a hamster spinning in the wheel. And the only way to stop the spinning is to just get off or to stop it. And I felt like I finally had this clarity of I understood what I was experiencing. It's not that it changed everything, but it was okay, I understand why I'm feeling this way. And I could kind of label how I was feeling. And it was really transformational for me.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you started labeling how you feel, because I'm going to ask you now the number one question that I get asked on social media, which is everyone's asking, how do I stop the thoughts, right? How do I stop the endless succession of thoughts that are going on in my head when I try to sit and do something like a meditation?
Yes. And I don't know what you tell them, but I'll tell you what I tell them. I say, you don't. I say that if your thoughts completely stop, you've probably died. Our brains, I said, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to quiet the fluctuations of the mind. You are trying to be an observer of your thoughts, an observer of your body and your mind and your heart. And so when I'm sitting there in meditation and some keeps popping into my mind, right? It doesn't matter if it's something silly like, I can't forget to bananas at the store. Or if it's something bigger that's I'm feeling really sad today. Why am I feeling sad? The point of your meditation is not to do any analysis in that moment or to solve all of your problems, but it's to slow down so that you can actually hear what your body and mind are telling you. Your body wants to tell you everything that you need to know, but do you slow down and listen to it? And so I really believe that, and people tell me that all the time. All the time people are like, well, I can't meditate because I can't turn my brain off. And it's not like a light switch. It's like a dimmer switch, right? You're going to just turn it down slowly over time and you're going to allow the mind to get quieter and quieter and quieter. But if thoughts keep popping into your mind, they're always spinning. That is such valuable information as to what's going on beneath the surface and what's happening kind of internally and maybe what's happening with that true self.
I love it. Yeah. And even just thinking the goal is to quiet the mind. I mean, it's so linear type A, Savasana-skipper-esque to put that framework on it. So I love your answer, which is really just, well, the point isn't to turn the brain off. It's to step into the observer of your thoughts. And a technique I share with people, which I think you were kind of referring to earlier, is the idea of labeling your thoughts, right? So you could label your thoughts like fear, worry, to-do list, right? Jack Kornfield talks about that in some of his mindfulness trainings. And I found that really helpful when I was first starting to meditate, because it just kind of helps you disassociate with the thoughts being so personal when you just kind of categorize them. I know for me personally, mantra has been really, really helpful as well. So that's another piece of advice I often give folks, which is that if they're really struggling, they can use a mantra and sort of replace the fluctuations of the mind with a chosen fluctuation. Mantra means wave of sound, right? So it's just choosing something else to sort of give the brain something to focus on. So I love mantra meditation. And then I'd love for you to now share with us a little bit about guided meditation, because I think one of the other things that's hard for people is there's so many types of meditation, just as many as there are types of yoga. And some of them are trademarked and branded, and some of them, are super expensive and you get a secret mantra. And, people can be confused about where to even just begin begin. And I want you to tell us about guided meditations specifically, because some people love them and some people are just like, I can't visualize stuff. I hate them. And sometimes I think they're a little bit of a crutch, right? Like you're not being alone with your thoughts. It's almost could be like listening to a story. And I know you're going to share some tips on how we can write really cool guided meditations, but I just kind of want to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make such a good point. And when you were talking about using mantra, the thought that popped up into my mind and that I always tell people is that if you're really struggling with your meditation, you might be trying a style that's just not quite your style. Like there are more styles of meditation than there are stars in the sky. And so it's just like, I mean, just like you said, it's about figuring out like what style of yoga is right for you. And, it's the same with meditation, like what style is going to work for you. And so I usually tell people that guided meditations are a great place to start. And they're a really great thing to use, like if you're trying to meditate on something really specific. So someone comes to me and, they're very curious and like, well, I've heard about meditation. I don't really know what it is. I don't really know how to start. I'm usually going to recommend that they start with guided meditations. And it's also something that I use like when I teach my yoga classes and I want to incorporate some meditation into the practice, because you don't have to do a lot of actual instruction. Where like if I was going to teach someone how to do a breath awareness meditation, or if you're doing something, where you have to discover your own personal mantra, like that's going to take a lot of explanation and a lot of teaching. For a guided meditation, when someone's there in Shavasana, or maybe they're just starting their practice, you can just roll right into it. But I do agree with you that I think sometimes guided meditations can be used as a crutch. So I think it's a great starting point, and I think it's a great tool to always have kind of in your back pocket. Like I find that if some of my meditations it's just not quite working for me that day, that it might be a good day to kind of just try a guided meditation. But I think it is also very good for those people who do enjoy kind of imagining things and visualizing things and really connect with like stories, as opposed to people who, if you don't really resonate with that, then a guided meditation might not be your best bet. You're probably going to prefer something like a breath meditation or a present moment meditation or a mantra meditation. And so it is about just finding the one that really fits you. But I would say guided meditations are probably like the best place to start. And if you have a large group of people, like if you're teaching a class or something like that, it's the easiest type of meditation to weave into what you're teaching.
So how do we teach really good, juicy ones? I know you wanted to share some tips with us. So guys, it doesn't matter if you're not a yoga teacher, because I think one thing that's really helpful is to have sort of a default meditation that you always do. I know like for me, I change it up. Sometimes I do special pranayama techniques and special meditations, but if it's just like not a special day, I just have a default meditation that usually is really working for me that I do for 4 or 5 months. And I think having that default is really, really great. And for you, that could be something guided, or you could be kind of working with visualization. So you might get some really good tips here, even on kind of how to design something that will really resonate for you. So what do you tell your, people you work with and trainees on how to write really amazing guided meditations?
Yes. So, and I think you make such a good point, because when I have people come to like my meditation teacher trainings, I have people that are not just yoga teachers. I have like everyone you can imagine. I have school teachers, I have physicians, I have therapists, I have daycare workers, just anyone that wants to be able to incorporate meditation into what they're already doing. But I would say that the secret to writing and delivering a really, really great, I think you called it juicy, a really great, juicy guided meditation is going to be telling a detailed story. That's all that it is. And so what you're going to do is you're going to start at the end of the story. So what do you want the ending of the story to be? How do you want people to feel when they're done? Do you want them to feel like they are relaxed? Do you want them to feel like they have released some emotional tension from their heart? Do you want them to feel like they have opened up their chakras? Like, what is the end of the story? You always have to start there. And then you are just going to start filling in the details. So I always say you're going to work backwards. So, Brett, can you give me an example of maybe a story we'd like to tell? Like what might be a purpose of a meditation?
So let's just go with something simple. I want people to feel really relaxed, but I want their heart to feel very, very full.
Awesome. Okay. So if we want them to feel relaxed, we also want their hearts to feel full. Like, what has to happen? What kind of words are you going to use? Maybe you use words like open and loving and release. What other words can you think of?
Oh my gosh, expand the heart center, send light into the heart center, maybe some kind of ball of light or glow in the area of the chest or the heart. Maybe we could talk about the heart chakra and talk about anahat and educate people about that a little bit.
Absolutely, yes. And so then you're going to start telling a story. So, like, I love the idea of being really relaxed, but maybe talking about like that heart chakra. And so, maybe what you do is you're just going to tell them this story about how they're just laying there and breathing and taking these nice, big, long exhales. And every time they breathe out, they feel more and more relaxed. And they bring their awareness to their heart center and they imagine the chakra, they imagine the color, they imagine it expanding. They imagine, instead of having any like negativity, which is kind of like smoke or gunk in their heart center, instead it's being filled with this like bright pink or maybe green light that is expanding and just bursting and, filling your heart open with love.
Maybe on every inhale, they fill the heart, and every exhale, they relax even deeper, something like that.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my God, I'm getting so excited. This is
And
fun.
then, yes. And then that's all that you do. You just tell someone a really great detailed story. And you can do something that, it can be kind of more abstract, like we're talking about right now, right? We're talking about, inhale, filling up the heart, exhale, releasing all that stress and negativity. But what if you were going to do something, maybe you want to tell someone a story about how they are walking through a forest and they're working, or maybe it's a story about renewal, and it's going to be something that feels more like storytelling. So I always I do this meditation sometimes when I have people working on overcoming a challenge. And it might sound like a little bit of a cliche, but what they do is I have them imagine that basically they're like climbing this mountain. And with every step that they're taking, they're basically overcoming something else. And I have them kind of like imagine, like, okay, you get a little bit higher, like you've just overcome your doubt. Your doubt is behind you. And then higher, you've just overcome, your limiting beliefs. And then a little bit higher, oh, you just surpassed those people that told you couldn't do it. Like, I'm going to tell them a very detailed story about them climbing this mountain, but I'm going to talk about, what does it sound, the sound of climbing up that mountain and like the pebbles and the rocks. And as you get higher, it's going to get colder, your heart's going to start beating. Like, you want to get very detailed and you want to think about every single one of the senses. Like, if you're putting them in a situation, you're telling them a story, you want to give them this really full, rich, complete story.
I love the tip about really utilizing all the senses, like describing the wind and the pebbles and how it feels and what it smells like and, the breeze on your skin. I think all of those little details, focusing on the senses, like you said, really help take it to the next level. And, before we let you go, because some folks are open to super long guided meditations with really cool stories, but some people are Savasana-skippers. So I'm curious, like, what advice do you have for folks to incorporate meditation into a yoga class that is like not that's maybe like a power flow, right? And I think you have some tips about how they can integrate that even just in Shavasana by saying a couple things. Because I know there's a lot of teachers out there, and I felt this way years ago when I was teaching a lot of power flow and, those kind of, even some heated classes and stuff. I really wanted to bring more meditation in, but it can feel intimidating because you don't know if your class is going to be open or receptive to that. So what are your tricks for us?
Yes. So my first trick is always know your audience. So if you know your class and you have a feel for your class and you think maybe they're not that open to it, I wouldn't go into this big, deep, long, taking them basically to a journey to another planet to, reach enlightenment. Maybe you just have them focus on the sensation of the air moving in through the nose and out through the nose in Shavasana. Like, it can be extremely simple, and you have to know your audience. If you have that kind of like a power audience, just keep it very simple, keep it very short. Maybe you're just in Shavasana for a few minutes, and you could even give them something like, imagine that you're lying on a beach and you are lying on sand. Your body is completely supported. You can feel the warm sun above you just melting away all of your stress and tension, right? Like, what was that? Like 30 seconds? But you can just start to incorporate it in that way. And then just know your audience. If you're teaching like a restorative class, you can almost do like a little mini meditation in every pose. Or maybe you have like a full 10-minute Shavasana, or maybe even a little bit longer. You can do these longer, more in-depth, more detailed guided meditations. It's really just about like knowing your audience and then applying it where it seems appropriate. And you don't have to name it like, okay, guys, now we're going to meditate. Because a lot of people get intimidated by that. And so if you just go into into it and just start telling them a story. And then they experience it. And then later you can be like, oh, like, did you enjoy that little meditation we did at the end? I think people get this idea of meditation in their head and they think it's very like mysterious and challenging and, a little bit out there, but it can be very simple and you can do it first and then kind of name it.
I love it. Yeah. Kind of tricking nicely people into it. Such a good tip. So before we let you go, will you tell the listeners how, and I'm going to put all your links and social media below, but just tell them quickly how they can find and connect with you online.
Yes. So you can find my podcast wherever you are currently listening to this podcast. And it's called Mindful in Minutes. It's all guided meditations. You can listen to it for your personal practice, but also if you're a teacher and you want some examples, you can always listen to those. You could also find me, I'm most active on Instagram. I respond to all my messages, and that's just at Yoga for You Online. And then you can check out my website, yogaforyouonline.com. So that has everything about upcoming meditation teacher trainings, Yoga Nidra teacher trainings, events, retreats, things like that.
Awesome. So I will put those links below. And Kelly, thanks so much for coming on the show. And listeners, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Remember, the best way to do that is in the form of a rating or review here on iTunes. It really helps get the show in front of more listeners who are looking to transform their life through yoga and meditation. So if you haven't taken a moment to do that, do it today. I'm sending you so much love, and we'll connect in the next episode. From my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savana podcast. To find out more about Savana, go to Savasana-skipper.com or follow Savana on Facebook at facebook.com/Savana-Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savanaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savana podcast.